It's Alex with Alex Custom Tech. Today I want to talk to you about how to choose a laptop. And this is not a definitive list. This is what I think is important and how I choose things that I consider before I choose a laptop, because every laptop and every scenario is going to be different. So these are the things you take into consideration. These are the questions you ask yourself, and by the answer you give, you determine what are the specs or the things you're looking to have or have built into the laptop, or the scalability of the laptop, and so on. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I'm going to do 5 points. I want to try and make this quick. The first thing I ask myself is, what kind of operating system? Okay. Now, computers have operating system. That's how they run, and you people are aware of most of them. Okay, but it depends on what you're doing. So of course, operating systems are iOS, which is like your Apple stuff, your phone, or your MacBook Pros. Windows, everybody knows that there's a lot of Windows in the working environment. Corporate America. Linux, that's another operating system, and Chrome OS. A lot of schools use Chrome OS. All right. Now, depending on what you're gonna do, depending on what software you're running, some software runs on Windows, that doesn't run on Linux. Some software runs on Windows, Linux, and Mac. But there's like different variation of how it operates. So depending on the software that's going to be crucial in your situation, you're going to pick a laptop with the operating system that supports that software. So that's number one. Number two is, how much storage or space do you need? Now, computers, laptops, we're talking about laptops right now, it's limited space, form factor small. So you can't get crazy with storage. We've come a long way though. You can't really get too crazy with it. So there's two things you have to really worry about. Now you can, but how much space do you need? What are you going to be doing with it? So, like, again, how much space do you need and what kind of storage? So you have SSD and you have, spinning drives, right? And there are different storage capacities. Now with the SSD, especially the one with the NVMe's, they are really fast when they boot. So if your operating system is sitting on that, it's going to boot real fast. Depends on if you need that or not, if that's important to you. As far as like storage, or spinning drive, those tend to be a little bit slower, but depending on what you're doing, it might not bother you. It might not, be an issue for you. Okay, so that's number two. So how much storage do you need, and what kind of storage? So do you need a spinning drive? A spinning drive, or do you need a SSD, right? And you should get at least 256 gigabits. At least to start, all right? And you can get laptops now with both SSD and spinning drives on them. All right. Number 3. This is important. How much RAM, right? RAM or memory, right? And this matters a lot, because depending on what you're doing, how much things you are running at once, I would say RAM is kind of like your desk, how big your desk is, how much things you can put on your desk at once. That's kind of how I see RAM in my head. So how big do you want your desk to be? how much things you're going to be doing at once. A lot of and I noticed this in a lot of businesses. A lot of business, the users have like sometimes 25, 30 different web pages up, or web tabs up. Each of those tabs is storing information that goes into RAM. So the bigger your RAM space for scenarios that you know you're going to be doing a lot of stuff, you're going to have a lot of papers on your desk, a lot of things on your desk, basically. That's how you think about it in your mind. You need more RAM space. So Windows right now runs on like good, pretty good operating system, like runs on about 8 gigs of RAM. Windows 10, runs on that. It's okay. It's average Windows user. But again, as I'm saying, like, it's average Windows user and corporate America, like the person who runs, like for instance, if you use a computer in your home, an average user at home is completely different than the average user in the workplace. Okay, so I mean, 8 is okay for to me, a user at home. But I think when you get into the workspace, you got to go with like 16, 32 gigs of RAM on the desktops, because of how people are like going crazy with the web page. So that's how I see RAM, and that's what you got to think about when you're picking a computer. So number four, we're going to talk about screens. We are focused on laptop, but this could go for monitors by themselves too. There's several monitors out there. The monitors have evolved over the years, but let's talk about what you're going to be doing primarily with the laptop. And if you're doing something that requires high performance, right, like what I'm doing with video editing, and you need high refresh rate, right, you go with a monitor that has that's known as a TN monitor, which stands for Twisted Pneumatic, right? What that means is complicated. It has to do with how the panel is manufactured and how the lights pass through it. All right. And that's also good for gaming. This is a caveat, right? It's a little high performance, high refresh rate, so that's why it's good for that. If you're into photography and you're doing graphics, color reproduction is paramount to you, you go with a IPS monitor, which stands for in plane switching. Again, how the light pass through the panels, right, on the monitor. That's how they manufacture it. With that one, it has a good view from any angle. And I think that helps when you're doing photography and graphics. Now, there's a third one that kind of like sits in the middle of those two, and the best way to describe it is it doesn't have the refresh rate and response time as the TN monitor, but it has a very good color reproduction, better than the TN monitor. So its color reproduction is better than the TN monitor, right? But it doesn't have the refresh rate the TN monitor has. And it has a better refresh rate than the IPS monitor, but not as good color reproduction as the IPS monitor. So it sits in the middle of those two extremes as far as like how they are. And that's kind of like, and that's why you have to know what you're going to be doing primarily with the laptop, and then pick one based on that. That one I considered not putting on a video because of how complicated it was. I didn't want to like confuse anybody, but because you just buy a computer and you just keep it moving. But it's kind of important depending on what you're doing. All right, your ports on your laptop. That's important. I don't know if I cut. Yeah, I did. The ports. What ports are on the laptop, and the reason why I'm so animated about ports, again, like I said, laptops are pretty much, the form factor is pretty much like, this is it, you know. So it's a finality to it. So you want to make sure that it has the things that you need. So say for instance, I bought this laptop, all right, and it only has a USB Type C, right? And my monitor has a HDMI or what's the other one? You know, an older connector, for instance. I'd have to get an adapter to buy other things to make that work. So I know that this right here has a Type C, and it's you know, so I know that I have to get a monitor or something that has Type C that I can use it. That's all I'm saying. And again, if I say, oh, this is also another one that happens a lot with the two audio, the earphone out and mic. Some of them only have one, and you might need one with just one, and opposed to having two of them. You know, so that's why ports are so important. I'm so adamant about ports. And the bonus I'm going to give you, which is, I'm going to talk about CPUs a little bit. So there's two major brands that you find in laptops and desktops, right? Intel and AMD. Apple has the M1s now, but I'm not going to talk about that, right? I'm not a big Apple user. I don't really mess with Apple that much, except for when I'm DJing. Now, say you see the laptop has an Intel Core i-11 400F. So you say to yourself, like, what's that? The first part of the naming convention, first part of it, Intel, you know that's the brand. The second part is Core i, that tells you the kind of CPU and kind of gives you an idea how much cores it has. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but the cores is kind of how I see it. It's kind of like, even though it's one CPU, it has multiple cores, which means it can do multiple things at once. It gives you a far more range of computing, right? So that's what. So if it's Core i or Core 7 or Ryzen 5, you know, I'm sorry, AMD is Ryzen 5. You know, you have an idea how much cores it has. Now, for that is a tier, and then the -11 part means that the 11th is the 11th generation of that Core i CPU. And then the 400 is like the model, and then that, you know, and that's it. And that's the same thing for AMD. AMD, we have AMD Ryzen 5, and then another 5, and then 600G. What I mean, that the AMD part of it is the brand. The Ryzen is a tier, or the CPU that gives you an idea how much cores it has, and the 5 after that. Now there is a 5. There is 5 is by itself. Then the next 5 will be the generation, and then the model number will be the 600. Now, if you don't understand that, don't worry about it. All right, it's just how they name the CPUs. That's the convention that they use. So to give you a little bit of idea of what that is. So that's what it is. But remember, these are the things you consider when you're picking out a laptop. This can be also used for desktops too. you might some other things you want to ask yourself, but this can be used for desktop too. But since I covered the unboxing of the Lenovo ThinkPad G15, so you're like, hey, why not tell you how to buy a laptop, and why I made my decision. So what I think about is, of course, these 5 things. I think about the operating system that I'm going to use. Because believe it or not, I don't only use Windows, right? I use Linux also, right? So I think about that. And how much RAM. Remember, how much RAM, less space, right? How much things you want to be doing at once. Screen size, screen type, panel type, the TN, IPS, or the VA. That's right, yeah, right? Those things you need to consider. Remember what they are. TN is for your refresh rate. It's the best performance as far as that's concerned. Response time. And your IPS is for your color reproduction. That's important. If you're into graphics or you're into photography, that's the kind of screen you're gonna need. And your VA sits in the middle. It's a little bit of both, the best of both worlds, And your ports on your laptop. That's important. So that's it. Just like and subscribe. Alice Custom Tech is still here. If you need any help, you can contact me, and I'll be happy to help you. All right, stay productive.